Is intersectionality a religion? We recently attended a panel discussion hosted by Peter Boghossian, a philosophy professor at Portland State University, and he asked exactly that question. So, surprisingly, they had some interesting points to be made. Following the event, I was able to sit down with Peter and his panel and have an interesting discussion about their ideas. It's not super comprehensive, but it is interesting. Before I get into that, let me give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, and then I will throw you straight into the video. Virtual Shield is a virtual private network service that can help keep you and your data safe as you browse the web. Whether it's a hacker, big business, or government actor, your data can be stolen and spied on. With Virtual Shield, you can protect your privacy and add a simple layer of defense to your internet browsing. Go to virtualshield.com/Timcast and use the promo code TIMCAST to get 20% off and no payments for 30 days. For those that are interested, I've included the link to Virtual Shield below. How's it going, everybody? I'm currently at Portland State University with the panelists from an event on intersectionality and religion. Do you guys want to do a real quick introduction of yourselves?
I'm James Lindsay, PhD in mathematics and background in physics, study religion and this stuff.
Peter Boghossian, and I'm on faculty here in the philosophy department in Portland State.
Helen Pluckrose, political commentator, author, editor.
Excellent. So we're going to do a quick discussion about the event that we were just at. They, essentially, at Portland State, there was a discussion, many people came, and it was about, I guess, how would you describe it? Is intersectionality a religion?
Is intersectionality a religion? And we argued for some of the parallels between intersectionality and religion.
Which is?
It has a moral architecture underneath it that parallels what you see in religious moral communities.
Bullet pointed.
Yeah, for example, you have a need to understand and exert and feel control over your environment. You have to have a sense of meaning making, understanding the world and how it works, and you have to have a sense of community. You have blasphemy restrictions, enforcement.
With political correctness.
With political correctness.
Political correctness, blasphemy. Original sin.
As privilege.
Is privilege. Being woke is being born again, so there's a lexicon.
You punish heretics with excommunication or with destroying their careers in this case, where it used to be kind of an inquisitorial burn by the stake or house arrest or whatever. Now it's you ruin their careers, you ruin their reputation, make sure they don't work again, you erase them from public life, that kind of a thing.
I want to throw it to you, make sure, do you have any thoughts on it? Because it's kind of a weird setup, so, yeah.
Yeah, no, in addition to that, we did have a bit of a look at how there's this absolute certainty of the goodness of this particular approach, and an understanding that any kind of objection to it or any different approach, even with the same goal, is equivalent to evil, really.
So one of the things that was discussed was, Jim, you defined intersectionality. Do you want to do a real quick,
Helen was our intersectionality person. I did religion, if you will.
Oh yeah. Do you want to do just a really quick, simple of what is intersectionality?
Intersectionality is the hermeneutic which looks at different types of oppression that can be experienced by the same person, leaving it to be difficult to tell what basis the prejudice is coming from, or even if it's a collection of prejudices and something unique.
So you drew, Jim, a diagram on the whiteboard, showing Venn diagram, but also the roads.
The roads. So Kimberly Crenshaw, the progenitor of intersectionality, used the idea that you can be discriminated against by, for example, race, and that's like being in a road and getting hit by a car. That's a discrimination. You could also, if say you're a black woman, be discriminated against in terms of being a woman by sex, and that's like being in a road and getting hit by a car. That's sexism. Being a black woman puts you in the intersection where those two roads cross, and so you could be hit by a car from either direction, and you may not know even which direction you got hit by it, which creates a unique form of oppression against you. That's her general metaphor that she used to come up with the term intersectionality.
So I do want to, I'm going to make sure that we stay kind of on track for talking about religion, but I want to preface this with some pushback, because isn't that true?
It is true, in fact. As a matter of fact, I think Kimberly Crenshaw hit upon a really important idea that there were ways in which discrimination law in the 1980s and probably going into the 1990s could easily overlook the problem where a black woman is uniquely being discriminated against because a firm might hire plenty of black men in one capacity and plenty of white women in another. If her only legal recourse is to charge sexism, they can say, well, look at all these women we have here, or it might be all white women. And then if it's to charge racism, say, well, look at all these black people we have working here, but in this case it's black men. And so black women could, whether it happened or not is a matter of debate, but black women could be discriminated against. It was a real problem, and it was really good that it got brought up. It's really bad that it got brought up in a way that adhered to critical theory rather than, tight legal theory.
So I guess my question then becomes, part of the discussion talking about intersectionality, I think you're right, or I should say I asked, and then you, I guess, agree that it does exist. Racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, all these things,
100%.
and there is an intersection to these. At what point or how does it become, in your opinion, religion?
When it relies upon sophistry rather than our standard rigorous epistemologies, the way that we deal with knowledge, that we deal with cultural issues in a rigorous way, instead relying upon concepts that are unfalsifiable, like people's motivations, whether it's racism or sexism, versus something more benign, like having overlooked the fact that this was a possibility. So when you start relying on sophistry and then self-replicating literature and then inciting that's where it starts to take on the shape of coming forth from scripture, which is a religious thing.
Do you guys have anything to add on the subject of the religious points? Because I feel like we kind of sped through a little bit, but you mentioned original sin and privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other key points? Because I do have another question, but I want to make sure that...
We mentioned woke and born again, so there's a lexicon. And are we missing? I mean, what are the main points?
I would say one of the biggest points is that you have this idea in a lot of religions that people who don't want to be a part of the religion want to continue in sin. They want to enjoy sin. They want to be sinners because there are certain advantages, like a more fun life, perhaps. Here you have this idea that the privileged often, so in the literature they call this privilege-preserving epistemic pushback or something like that, where people who want to preserve their privilege act in ways, of course this is one of these unfalsifiable elements where you can't prove that that's what they're really doing, but they can say that that's what it's got to be. They want to act in ways to preserve their privilege. So a lot of the stuff that might be construed as pushing back against intersectionality gets discounted as, well, you just want to keep your privilege versus, making a legitimate criticism. And the same thing in religion, you could say, well, are you sure that you really shouldn't be able to drink alcohol or to whatever level you want or whatever? Well, you just want to keep being a sinner. And so there's a deep parallel there.
Yeah. So I did a documentary about institutional racism, right? And I want to do a quick explanation for everybody because we often hear systemic racism. I know that you guys brought it up that the definitions change. Systemic racism becomes one directional. Only white people can be racist.
That's right.
And I feel like one of the things lost in this is that there really is an institutional racism. And one example is the real estate market, right? So I did a documentary on how there's a practice throughout, up until the 80s when it became illegal, called blockbusting, where they would send a black family to a white neighborhood to damage property value so they could buy property at a premium and then move that black family out and resell to make profit. And that negatively impacts specifically the black community. When I hear about these things, I say, yeah, there is a real problem that needs to be solved. And now I see two problems. As much as I value conversation, and I think there's a lot of merit in what is being said here, don't you think, to a certain extent, conversations like this might actually serve to limit the actual work being done to end things like institutional racism or something?
No, I think we've got to push for truth first. And
Why the hell?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you can reasonably address serious issues like racism, sexism, transphobia by coming from a postmodern, subjective, relativistic, and really narratorial approach. This is if there is discrimination, and there certainly is in some places and in some areas, then this needs to be approached rigorously and with reason, not with shutting down anybody who disagrees or...
No, I agree. I completely agree.
So I am advocating a sort of a universal liberalism.
Yeah.
This is what brought us this far. If sexism exists somewhere, then that would need to be shown
Well, yeah, but I guess what I mean is,
What do you mean?
there are going to be people who are captivated by this fight. They're going to be captivated by the intersectionals versus the free thinkers, the liberal democracy versus intersectional feminism. And then what ends up happening is, and I don't mean to place blame on anybody or anything like that, because I certainly think conversations like this are extremely valuable.
Well, then
but I'm just
already, if you think conversations are extremely valuable, then you take.
Oh, I'm just
then you side
trying
with the free thinkers.
I'm just trying to give you the question so that you can.
Yeah. Okay. So what's
throw
the
against it.
question?
That, and I would say in this regard, the blame is placed on both people on the far left who are clouding the discussion, so we can't actually solve these problems.
Sure.
But at the same time, when the fight becomes about that instead of the actual fight against racism and sexism, do you think there will be some people who are then going to miss the opportunity or become adversarial to the actual legitimate problems we face? Was that clear enough?
Yeah, there will be some people who do it completely wrong. That's just going to happen. You can't. In fact, it's part of the deal is that you can't really try even to police too much what's going on. What you do is insist again and again and again upon a process of dialectic, of honesty, of adhering by the rules of discussion that we have seen produced the modern world from what basically amounts to sect warfare, which dominated before we came up with liberalism.
Let me try and do a simpler example. I have met some Trump supporters who absolutely just do not want to hear the conversation about racism, about transphobia.
Yeah, they're the same thing on the other side, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, same problem. They're gonna run with this probably, and they're the same problem. They're not doing any better. Really.
Yeah, and the solutions are go ahead.
There are two ways to go if we're having this sort of far leftist nonsense, which there can be a pushback from the far right. There can be Trump supporting, there can be complete denial of any problem, or there can be a consistently liberal response which acknowledges the problem of racism and acknowledges the problem of how it's being addressed and tries to bring something real out of it.
Yeah. So, just maybe one or two more questions. When it comes to religion, someone had a really great question. They said, do you think they're essentially thought leaders, charismatic individuals who are within the movement? And I think you typically said you all didn't feel it was that way. Is that fair to say that? It's
a yes and no situation. There are, but they don't tend to last terribly long. Is kind of more of a thing. Of course, the culture war is not exactly our focus, or I'll speak for me at least. We're really kind of more interested in the academic side of it, of course. So, but there are people who have a huge amount of traction, who have become thought leaders, who people turn to. There's Martha Nussbaum wrote this paper a long time ago that Pete referenced during the talk, where she characterized Judith Butler as a guru of this performative gender theory. And so there's some of that, yes. And within the movement, yes, it happens. But then on the other hand, most of them don't tend to last very long. And I don't know that there's these charismatic figures that they rally around so much.
That was the problem I had.
That was a charismatic.
Yeah, that was my problem too.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to speak badly of people.
It's not a cult of personality, it's a cult of ideas.
Yeah.
All right.
Because they don't, they're not in your world. They're not in the YouTube world. So they're in our papers, etc. So there's a cult around their ideas. Oh, their name, Judith Butler, or the essence of the
There's
Haran.
actually a magazine called Judy once, which had a lot of photos of her, and there is a sort of small sort of intellectual cult following of Judith Butler, but I don't think it's a large or significant thing. Mostly she is just appreciated for her ideas, which are sort of taken on further. So I don't even think that counts.
All right. Because we're not going to do the longest conversation in the world, one final question.
Sure, anything.
What's the future? In regards to this conversation.
I mean, I think that what's going to happen for a little while is that this conversation on the side of liberalism is going to continue to become ascendant. Meanwhile, we're going to see increasingly desperate and angry pushback from the other side because it is culturally still ascending, especially under Trump. The resistance, if you will, is growing. It's becoming more and more a feeling of like a existential threat behind taking this position. So it's going to be a bit ugly for a little while, but ultimately I think, frankly, most of these people are pretty young. They're going to grow older, they're going to calm down, they're going to find other things to do, and the younger generation isn't going to pick it up as much because it's such a hot mess that they don't want to pick that potato up, and it's going to fizzle out. But it won't fizzle out unless these conversations
Yeah, so I think my own personal take on this is it will ascend, I agree. Liberalism will become under attack. Increasingly, free speech will be under attack. The far left will continue to control the universities. I can't give you a timeline, but I don't think that they've developed a defense of their beliefs. I don't think it's possible because of something reflexive or in the structure of their beliefs they can't defend these ideas. That's why they never show up when we invite them. And even when we invite them off campus to discussions, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, they're invited all the time. They never show up to these conversations. So they don't know how to defend these ideas because built in is that you don't look at the other side of the case. That's a huge problem. So my guess is that it's going to get a lot worse, and then it's going to get better. Maybe something's going to happen. Someone's going to figure out how to solve this, but this is not sustainable. People tend to project, oh look, the umbrella of rights was extended from gays and blacks and now animals, etc., and they just extend from those data points to the future, and they say, oh, and there's no gender and everybody's one name or whatever it is, but there's no necessity in that. I think Martin Luther King, we talked about, the moral arc does bend towards justice. These people are attempting to bend it the other way, even though they think they're bending it towards justice.
Right. And
I think there's just going to be more reaction, and all we can do is try to guide that reaction, join the conversation, influence people to be consistent, be liberal, and be reasonable as much as we can.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for sitting down with me.
I appreciate the fact that you came. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and I've got some more news. This Sunday, we essentially had an hour and a half long argument, I suppose, about the root cause of...
We disagreed.
We disagreed for sure, and that's a longer conversation that'll be up on Sunday, which actually we recorded before this. So this is, a day later at the event. So I'll have the link to the... I won't have the link to that video. That'll be up on Sunday, so stay tuned for that. But we're going to have another video piece up on Subverse, which we are launching, so get ready for that, and I'll put the link to Subverse in the description below. And so we actually have some video from the event, the Q&A. We have a Q&A from the James Damore event, and we're going to have more interviews. So again, thank you all so much for hanging out and watching. You can follow me. I'm on Twitter @TimCast. Stay tuned to new videos every day at 4 p.m., and I will see you all tomorrow.